soil provides shelter for many living organisms such as worms, rodents, molds, and beetles. The roots of the small plants are embedded entirely in the topsoil. The next layer of the soil has a lesser amount of humus but more of minerals. This layer is generally harder and more compact and is called the B horizon or the middle layer. Now the top layer as we called is at A horizon. Next comes the other layer which is a little bit harder and in which many living organisms such as worms and rodents, then moles and beetles, those small insects also live in this B horizon only, in the second layer of the soil, the layer which comes just after the top soil. Now this has less amount of humus but it has lot of minerals in it, and it is called as the B horizon or the middle layer. After you can see in this also, this is your A horizon and this is your B horizon, the second layer after the topmost layer. Now next is the C horizon. This third layer is the C horizon, which is made up of small humus lumps of rocks and cracks and crevices. Each of this layer is the bedrock, which has been hard and difficult to dig with a spade. Now the sea layer, which is made up of mainly of the small rocks or the pieces of the small rocks, and it is very hard layer which has a bedrock, means totally there are the rocks, a small layer, it is a layer of small rocks only, so it is difficult to dig with spade, मतलब इसको कुहाड़ी से खोदना बहुत मुश्किल हो जाता है, जिसे हम खोदते हैं स्पेड से तो वो जो है खोदना बहुत मुश्किल हो जाता है. नेक्स्ट इज योर 9.3 टाइप, सॉइल टाइप. As you know, weathering of rocks produces small particles of various materials. These includes sand and clay. The relative amount of sand and clay depends upon the rock from which the particles are formed, and that is the parent rock. The mixture of rock particles and humus is called as the soil. Now, how are the different types of soil formed? First of all, we have to see that what type of rock, by the weathering of which type of rock the soil has been formed from, because those components are present in the soil. The components from which the rock is made of, those components are only present in the soil, because those are the small particles of that soil only, which we call it as a parent rock also, जिसमें से वो बनता है. तो soil, what is the soil? It is the mixture of rock particles and the humus that is present in the soil. जो rock के जो पार्टिकल्स होते हैं, छोटे छोटे जो पार्टिकल्स बनते हैं बाय द ब्रेकिंग अप ऑफ द रॉक्स, सो दिस कंटेन्स मेनली रिलेटिव अमाउंट ऑफ सैंड एंड क्ले, मतलब मेजर पार्ट ऑफ द रॉक्स इज मेड अप ऑफ द सैंड एंड क्ले ओनली, फ्रॉम दैट इट इज मेड. सो रॉक इज, इट इज अ मिक्सचर ऑफ, सॉइल इज अ मिक्सचर ऑफ रॉक्स particles and the humus that is the top layer, means the rotten or the dead leaves and the remains of some small animals living in the soil. Living organisms such as bacteria, plant root, and earthworm are some of the important parts of any soil. Now, what do we find in the soil is first of all small bacteria. So very small microorganism, living organisms are there. Then certain type of bacteria are also present in the soil. Then plant roots, मतलब कि जो plants वहाँ उगते हैं उनकी जो वहाँ जो roots होते हैं that are embedded in that. Sometimes the only roots remain in the soil. Then the earthworms, which are a very important part of the soil. So all these things are present in the soil. The soil is classified on the basis of the proportion of particles of various sizes. If the soil contains greater proportion of big particles, it is called as sandy soil. Now the soil is classified on the basis of the particles that are present and the proportion of, or the quantity of which particle is more, and that type of the soil it becomes. Like if the particles of the greater number of bigger particles are there, मतलब the rock के जो छोटे छोटे पार्टिकल्स बनते हैं उसमें जो सबसे बड़े पार्टिकल्स होते हैं वो वाला सॉइल होता है, तो उसको हम सैंडी सॉइल कहते हैं, जिसमें बिगर प्रपोर्शन, जो सॉइल के जो ग्रेटर प्रपोर्शन होता है वो उसके अंदर होता है, मतलब रॉक्स का जो साइज होता है वो ज़्यादा बड़ा होता है. and if the proportion of fine particles is higher then it is called as the clay soil. और अगर एकदम से महीन पाउडर जैसा बारीक अगर रॉक के जो पार्टिकल्स होते हैं then it becomes a clay soil. If that fine particles are more in the soil then it becomes a clay soil. If the bigger particles are there in the soil it becomes the sandy soil. The size of the particles in the soil has an influence on its properties also. Now what type of soil it is, what type of particles, what is the size of the particles that is present in the soil also affects the properties of the soil. The soil because the percolation property or the water retention property in the of the soil differs because of those particles present in the soil. Sand particles are quite large, they cannot fit close together, so there are large spaces between them. These spaces are filled with air. We can say that the sand is well aired. Water can drain quickly through the spaces between the sand particles. So sand soil tends to be light, well aerated and rather dry. Now we first will talk about the properties of the sandy soil. Now you know very well that sand particles are bigger in size compared to the clay soil. Now that means those particles don't stick together with each other. There's lot of space present between each sand particle, so in between those gaps of the particles the air is present, so it is well aerated, means lot of air is present in the sandy soil. So water, when you pour the water on the sandy soil it drains easily into the soil. मतलब वो पानी जो है रेती के अंदर या रेती वाले मिट्टी के अंदर इजीली पानी जो है चला जाता है, अंदर जो है नीचे चला जाता है, इसलिए वो टाइप का सॉइल होता है वो ज़्यादा ड्राई होता है. दैट मीन्स इट इज़ वेल एरिएटेड, नो डाउट अबाउट दैट, बट it tends to be rather dry. It is light but dry because water does not retain in that soil, or it cannot hold the water for a longer period of time because of the particles don't stick to each other, so the gap is there, so water easily moves down the soil, so the soil becomes dry. Clay particles being much smaller packed together tightly, leaving little space for air. Unlike sandy soil, water can be held in the tiny gaps between the particles of the clay. So clay soil have less air but they are heavy as they hold more water than the sandy soil. Now if we compare the sandy and the clay soil, as I told you, the particles of the soil are in the sandy soil don't fit or stick to each other, but in the clay soil there is a very little gap between the particles of the soil. They stick to each other very easily, so very little space is left between the soil, so the soil is not that much airy as compared to the sandy soil. So the water, when you pour in the soil, the water retains for a longer period of time because it does not drain out easily into the soil because of the less number of less gap that is present between the particles of the soil. And this soil is heavy also because it can retain water for a longer period of time. Water does not dry quickly in the clay soil, so the particles of the soil are heavy also because of the presence of water in them. The best topmost soil for growing plants is loam. Loam soil is the mixture of sandy soil and the clay and another type of soil particles known as the silt. Silt occurs as the deposit in the river beds. The size of the silt particles is between those of the sand and clay. The loamy soil also has humus in it. It has the right water holding capacity for the growth of the plants. Now there's a third type of soil which is called as the loamy soil, which is best considered best for growing the crops. The reason is that because it is a mixture of the sandy and clay soil. So both the properties of the sandy and clay soil will be there. That means the water holding capacity will be there. It will be little bit dry also. Small particles, fine particles of soil are also there, as well as bigger particles are also there. Then there's one more another type of soil is also mixed in the loamy soil, that is the silt, which is found near the it is the deposits in the river beds. मतलब कि नदी के आसपास जितनी मिट्टी होती है उसमें उस टाइप की जो होती है वो क्वालिटीज उसके अंदर होती है. एंड द साइज ऑफ सिल्ट पार्टिकल इज बिगर देन दैट ऑफ दोज ऑफ सैंड एंड क्ले. और जो उसका पार्टिकल का साइज होता है वो सैंडी और क्ले सॉइल से बड़ा होता है. और लोमी सॉइल ऑल्सो कंटेन्स ह्यूमस ऑल्सो, सो इट इज एंड इट हैज़ the right water holding capacity. The water holding capacity of this soil is maintained because of the presence of clay and sandy soil both. इसलिए right amount of water remains in the soil which suits the growth of the plant. So loamy soil is best for the growth of the plants. Now next is, I want to know what kind of soil should be used for making earthen pots, that means utensils and मिट्टी की चीज़ें हम बनाते हैं उसके लिए किस तरह की मिट्टी की ज़रूरत होती है. जैसे मटका बनाते हैं, पॉट बनाते हैं, सुराही विच इज़ यूज्ड फॉर वाटर स्टोरेज, दैट वी यूज़ मटका, मतलब जो पॉट्स होते हैं वो हम किस मिट्टी से बनाते हैं. Now there is another activity which is 9.3 here. Collect samples of clay, loamy and sandy soil. Take a fistful of a soil from one of the samples. Remove any pebbles, rocks or grass blades from it. Now you have to take three different types of soils which I explained here: sandy, clay and loamy soil. A handful of soil you have to take, and then you have to remove, take few little quantity of the soil. Remove any of the things that are present, like rocks are present, grass blades मतलब छोटे छोटे घास के टुकड़े हैं या छोटे छोटे पत्थर हैं, इन सबको हमको रिमूव करना है. Now add water drop by drop and knead the soil. Now you have to knead the soil, मतलब थोड़ा थोड़ा पानी ऐड करके जो है, जैसे हम आटा गूंथते हैं वैसे ही इसको भी, मिट्टी को भी अच्छे से गूंथ लेना है, सो दैट इट कैन बिकम एक डव जैसा बना लेना है. एड जस्ट इनफ वाटर so that a ball can be made from it. Means after mixing it with the water you have to make a big ball, मतलब अच्छे से knead करना है, but at the same time it should not be sticky also. So you have to add a little water so that the soil should not become too sticky also, but it should be that it can be converted into a ball form. यह अच्छे से knead हो जाता है. Try to make a ball from the soil. On a flat surface, roll the ball into cylinder. Try to make a ring from this cylinder. अब एक इसका बॉल बनाने के बाद इसको आप जो है एक फ्लैट सरफेस पे इसको जो रोल कर लीजिए और एक सिलेंडर फॉर्म में इसको रोल कीजिए और उसमें से एक रिंग बनाइए. Repeat this activity with other samples also. Repeat the activity with other samples also. Does the extent of which a soil can be shaped indicate its type? Can you suggest which type of soil would be best for making pots, toys and statues? अब इस तरीके से जितने भी सैम्पल्स, आपने तीनों सैम्पल्स में से आपको इस तरीके से रोल आउट करना है और रिपीट करना है. फिर आप देख सकते हैं, आपको खुद ही पता लगेगा कि कौन सा सॉइल जो है वो बेस्ट है फॉर डूइंग दिस और फॉर मेकिंग द पॉट्स. Now next is 9.4. You can see here in this picture, you can see this is how you have to knead that. Take a roll, knead it and convert it into ball. फिर ऐसे इसको roll करके ऐसा ring बनाना है. This is the way you have to work with the soil. Now the remaining part of the lesson will be explained on the next turn.